Have you ever been driving down one of those old, winding coastal roads in New England or New York, and you spot one of those weathered stone markers sitting quietly on the roadside? Well, if you have, you've driven right past a centuries-old mystery. Today, in this explainer, we're unpacking a really charming, widely believed local legend about those colonial milestones and the iconic founding father who supposedly put them there, Benjamin Franklin.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the central mystery here is just fantastic. Did Benjamin Franklin actually invent and plant these iconic stone markers? For literally centuries, local historical societies, town records, and super proud residents have pointed to these heavy stones and confidently declared, yep, Ben Franklin himself put that there. It's a story passed down through generations, taught in local schools, etched right onto bronze plaques. But, as we're about to discover, the truth is a lot more complicated, and honestly, way more fascinating than the myth. So let's start with the legend itself. We'll call it the Legend of 1753. According to local lore, Ben Franklin, acting as the deputy postmaster of the colonies, took this grand tour along the lower post road through Connecticut. His goal? To standardize postal rates based on distance. And the story paints this highly romanticized picture, right? You've got Franklin, the brilliant inventor, riding through the summer heat in a carriage that he's specially rigged with a mechanical odometer of his own design. And as he methodically maps out these routes, his assistants are supposedly dropping these heavy stone markers at every single mile point. I mean, it sounds perfectly in character for the guy, doesn't it?
And this legend is so deeply entrenched that it comes with its own folksy anecdotes. Like, take this incredible story from Sutton, Massachusetts. Local lore says Franklin laid out the post road right through their town and spent the night at the Gray Bear farm. The family there supposedly treated the postmaster general to this magnificent turkey supper, lodging, breakfast, the whole shebang. When Franklin finally asked for his bill, the lady of the house reportedly replied, "There is no bill. It has been a great pleasure, Mr. Franklin." To which Franklin supposedly kissed her hand and said it was the best service for the least expense he'd ever had. It's just a brilliant story that makes the whole milestone legend feel incredibly real. And because of stories like that, you have towns all across the Northeast proudly claiming their own piece of Franklin history. Sutton, Massachusetts, Greenwich, Connecticut, Southold out on Long Island, all the way down into Manhattan. If you visit these places, locals will eagerly point out their surviving stones and attribute them directly to Franklin's legendary 1753 journey, or sometimes a later trip. The physical presence of these stones really serves as an anchor for the community. It's their direct connection to the founding of the nation. Let's actually look at some of this physical evidence that locals use to validate the myth. Take the Greenwich marker in Connecticut, right on Palmer Hill Road. It's this beautifully weathered stone that tells travelers they're 23 miles from Fairfield. But what's wonderfully quirky about it is that Fairfield is explicitly misspelled, Fairfield. For centuries, this charmingly imperfect marker has been fiercely protected by the community because they firmly believed it was directly commissioned by Ben Franklin during an inspection trip in 1763. And the evidence tour continues right into the heart of New York City. The Manhattan marker is this sandstone relic that originally stood on the old post road, letting people know how far they were from City Hall. When modernization and road crews threatened to destroy it in the early 20th century, a wealthy merchant named William Isham actually stepped in, saved it, and had it permanently embedded into the entrance wall of his estate, which is now Isham Park. People absolutely revere these stones. They weren't just rocks. They were treated as sacred, direct connections to Franklin himself. Now, what's really interesting about this is where this beautifully constructed, romantic narrative collides head-on with hard historical fact. On one hand, we've got this vivid image of Franklin, the inventor, measuring the roads, dropping stones. But on the other, we have a massive twist. In 1954, Yale University launched an exhaustive historical investigation into Benjamin Franklin's life. And what they found, or actually, scratch that, what they didn't find, shattered the milestone myth entirely. This conclusion comes directly from that 1954 project, led by Dr. Leonard W. Lawbery. His team began the monumental task of collating the papers of Benjamin Franklin. They meticulously assembled every manuscript, every printed document, every surviving letter he ever wrote or received during his entire time as deputy postmaster. We are talking about a literal mountain of contemporary documents. And in all of that paperwork, the evidence for his involvement with the milestones was completely zero. Not one single document contained a reference to him erecting roadside milestones. Then the Yale report delivers a logical bombshell. The post office had absolutely zero responsibility for building or maintaining roads. Furthermore, milestones were essentially just window dressing for private travelers who didn't know the way. The post riders who actually carried the mail,
They knew these routes like the back of their hand. They traveled them day in and day out. Milestones were totally useless for mail delivery, which means the post office would have never spent a single penny of their budget on them.
And if the administrative logic isn't enough for you, Yale provided a bulletproof logistical alibi: the weather. The tradition often points to Franklin's journeys to Boston to explain these markers, but the records show that one of his major trips back down that exact route happened during January and February. The Yale historians wryly pointed out that anyone who has ever tried to do pick and shovel work in the frozen New England ground in the dead of winter knows it's impossible. Franklin's crew simply couldn't have been planting heavy stone markers on that trip. No way.
Well, what about that 1763 trip, the one the Greenwich marker is so famously attributed to? The Yale collation put the final nail in the coffin right here. By constructing a day-by-day itinerary based on his letters, historians proved that Franklin's party actually traveled from New York City to Newport, Rhode Island by water, through Long Island Sound. During that specific trip, Ben Franklin literally never even set foot on Connecticut soil. He couldn't possibly have planted the Greenwich stone.
And this brilliantly illustrates the academic community's final verdict. The editors of the Yale papers stated loud and clear that they were compelled to completely reject this pleasant but unsupported tradition. Benjamin Franklin had absolutely nothing directly to do with the measuring of colonial roads or the erection of these milestones. The myth, as beloved as it was entirely fabricated by later generations who were just looking for a famous figure to tie their local history to. Which brings us to, honestly, the most exciting part of this explainer. If the great Benjamin Franklin didn't build them, then who did? Where did these mysterious stones actually come from? To answer that, we have to pivot away from the founding fathers and look at the actual everyday people, the local governments and the businesses that were quietly building the infrastructure of early America. The true origin for a lot of these markers actually starts with a law, the Connecticut Enabling Act of 1767. Before this, people just used heaps of stones to mark distances. Kind of basic, right? But as travel picked up, the public demanded better. So the colonial general court officially ordered local town selectmen to set up proper stones, at least 2 feet high, by the side of the roads, explicitly marking the distance to the county seat. This wasn't some grand federal postal scheme. It was a localized grassroots effort managed right at the town meeting level.
But the story gets even better once we hit the early 1800s. A rush of newly formed private turnpike companies started taking over the roads. These companies set up toll booths, and the public deeply resented having to pay what they called 2 bits to travel on roads they felt should be totally free. So, to combat this terrible corporate image, the turnback companies pulled off a brilliant PR stunt. They began planting these novel, well-shaped, clearly carved stone markers along their roads. It was a status symbol, a way to create a sense of professional infrastructure that might justify those unpopular toll charges to weary travelers.
A perfect, surviving example of this PR spin is Vernon's milestone in Connecticut. It wasn't placed by some postmaster in the 1750s. It was erected in 1801 by the Hartford and Toland Turnpike Company. If you read the inscription, it says VIMTCH, which translates to 6 Miles Toland Courthouse. These stones functioned as an early form of GPS for stagecoach drivers, letting them know exactly where they were on the toll network, long after Franklin had moved on to other things. Let's move to and see how this builds when we map out the real chronological history. A totally different story emerges. In 1753, Franklin is appointed postmaster, but despite all the myths, he plants absolutely 0 markers. By 1767, it's the local Connecticut Enabling Act that orders ordinary towns to erect the first official milestones. And then from 1801 onwards, it's those private turnpike companies placing the markers as a massive public relations campaign. It's a fascinating evolution from local town management straight into corporate infrastructure. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We've just seen how easily history forgot the true, everyday builders of these incredible stones, swapping out town selectmen and toll companies for a catchy, romantic myth about Ben Franklin. It really makes you wonder, as you drive through your own town, what other widely accepted local legends are hiding a much more complex and maybe much more fascinating historical truth? Keep questioning, keep looking closely at the world around you, and I'll see you in the next explainer.